I was seconds away from signing the divorce papers when a stranger sat down across from me. He offered no comfort, just a terrifying warning that if I signed today, I would lose everything. Then he slid a briefcase forward and opened it. Inside sat an offer of $100 million to destroy my husband in a way he would never see coming. My name is Kimberly Garza. I am 37 years old, and for a long time, I defined myself by the quiet, steady rhythm of my life. I work from home as a freelance editor, fixing the structural flaws in other people's narratives, tightening dialogue, and ensuring that the plot makes sense. It is ironic, looking back, that I spent my days correcting the inconsistencies in fiction while missing the glaring plot holes in my own reality. I have been married to Evan Turner for 8 years. Ours was not a marriage of fireworks or dramatic arguments. It was a comfortable, silent contract. We were the couple people stopped asking about because we were simply there, solid and unmoving, like a piece of furniture you stop noticing after a decade. Evan is 42. He is a project manager at Stonebridge Development, a company that builds soulless luxury condos in gentrifying neighborhoods. For the first 6 years, he was the man who came home at 6 in the evening, loosened his tie, and asked what we were having for dinner. But in the last 2 years, the timeline had shifted. 6 o'clock became 7, 7 became 9. The excuses were always constructed with the sturdy logic of a construction manager. There were permit delays. There were unexpected inspections. There were investors flying in from the West Coast who needed hand-holding. I nodded. I accepted. I told myself that ambition was a demanding mistress, and that I should be grateful to have a husband who worked hard to pay the mortgage on our colonial in the suburbs. But the silence in the house changed. It stopped being the comfortable silence of companionship and turned into the heavy, suffocating silence of things unsaid. The most telling sign was the phone. It is a cliché in every bad novel I have ever rejected, but clichés exist because they are often true. Evan used to leave his phone on the kitchen counter, screen up, indifferent to its blinking notifications. Then, slowly, the habits shifted. The phone began to live in his pocket. When he did set it down, it was always face down, always. If I walked into the room while he was typing, his thumb would hover over the lock button, a reflexive, defensive twitch. He started taking it into the bathroom for showers. He claimed he listened to podcasts to unwind. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the distance between us was just the inevitable erosion of middle age, the cooling of passion that every magazine article warned women about. I spent months gaslighting myself. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that Evan loved me in his own way, that he was just tired, that Stonebridge Development was draining him dry. I focused on my work. I edited 3 memoirs and a dense historical novel in the span of 4 months, burying my head in words to avoid reading the subtext of my own marriage. I cooked his favorite meals, which he often ate cold after reheating them in the microwave at 10 at night. I kept the house clean. I maintained the facade. It was a Tuesday in mid-October when the narrative finally snapped. I had finished my edits early and decided to drive into the city to pick up a specific blend of coffee beans Evan used to like. It was a pathetic gesture. Really. A small, desperate attempt to buy back a piece of the man who used to wake up early on Sundays to brew coffee for me. The roastery was in a trendy district, about 4 blocks from the Stonebridge Development offices. I knew he was busy. I had no intention of dropping by to surprise him, because I knew, instinctively, that he would not be happy to see me. I parked my car and walked toward the shop. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn day that usually made me feel hopeful. I was adjusting my scarf when I glanced across the street. There was a bistro there, one of those places with outdoor seating enclosed by glass panels to keep out the wind. And there he was. Evan was not at a construction site. He was not in a boardroom with investors. He was sitting at a small round table near the window. He was not alone. Sitting across from him was a woman. She was young, not a child, but certainly younger than me, maybe 28 or 30. She had dark hair that fell loose over her shoulders, and she was wearing a cream-colored coat that looked expensive. But it was not her appearance that stopped my heart. It was his. Evan was leaning forward, His entire posture was open, engaged, magnetic. He was smiling at her, but not his polite, project manager smile. It was a smile I had not seen in 5 years. It was the smile of a man who was charming someone. He said something, and she threw her head back and laughed. It was a free, easy sound that I could imagine even through the glass and the traffic noise. Then, he reached across the table. I froze on the sidewalk, a pedestrian obstacle, as people brushed past me. Evan took her hand. He did not just hold it. He ran his thumb over her knuckles. A slow, intimate caress that spoke of familiarity. This was not a first date. This was not a casual flirtation. This was established. This was a routine. The way she looked at him, with a mixture of adoration and possession, told me everything I had refused to admit to myself during those long, silent evenings. He looked alive. That was the most painful part. The man who came home to me was a gray, tired ghost who grunted one-word answers and fell asleep with his back to me. The man in the bistro was vibrant. He was listening to her as if she were the only person in the world who had anything interesting to say. My first instinct was to storm across the street. I wanted to pound on the glass. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march in there and demand to know who she was and how long this had been going on. I wanted to overturn the table and shatter that perfect little bubble they had created. But I didn't move. I am an editor. My job is to look at the whole picture, to understand the structure of the story before I make a correction. If I went in there now, I would be the hysterical wife. I would be the crazy woman making a scene. Evan would deny it. He would say she was a client. He would say I was misunderstanding a friendly gesture. He would gaslight me. And because I had no hard proof other than a handhold in a public place, he might even succeed. He would lock his phone tighter. He would hide better. I stood there for 3 minutes. I watched him signal the waiter for the check. I watched him help her with her coat. I watched the proprietary hand he placed on the small of her back as they stood up. I turned around and walked back to my car. My legs felt like they were moving through deep water. My breath was shallow. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I did not cry. I expected tears, but they did not come. Instead, a cold, hard knot formed in the center of my chest. It was heavy, like a stone. I drove home in silence. I did not buy the coffee beans. When Evan came home that night, it was 40 minutes past 8. He walked into the kitchen, where I was pretending to read a manuscript on my tablet. He looked the same as he always did. Tired, slightly rumpled, his tie loosened. "Hey," he said, opening the refrigerator. "Long day." I looked at him. I really looked at him. I looked for the trace of the man I had seen in the bistro, but he was gone. He had put the mask back on before he walked through the door. "Did you eat?" I asked. My voice sounded normal. It terrified me how normal it sounded. "Yeah, we grabbed some sandwiches at the site," he said, grabbing a bottle of water. "I'm going to hop in the shower. I reek of drywall dust." He did not reek of drywall dust. He smelled faintly of the expensive cologne he used to save for anniversaries, mixed with the distinct floral scent of a woman's perfume that had clung to his coat. I watched him walk down the hallway. I heard the bathroom door close. I heard the lock click. I sat there in the kitchen of the home we had bought together, surrounded by the life we had built over 8 years. I realized then that the marriage I thought I was saving was already a corpse. Evan had not just stepped out on me. He was living an entirely different life, one where he was happy, attentive, and alive. I was just the placeholder. I was the safe harbor he docked at when he was too tired to be someone else. The love I had for him didn't vanish in that second, but it curdled. It turned into something sour and sharp. I looked at the closed bathroom door. I knew that if I confronted him now, I would lose. I would lose my dignity. I would lose my leverage. I would be the tragic victim in his story of finding true love. I am not a victim. I turned off my tablet. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark suburban street. I was not ready to sign the papers yet. I was not ready to hand him his freedom on a silver platter so he could run to the woman in the cream coat. If he wanted to rewrite our ending, he was going to find out that I was a much better editor than he was. Love might have been dead, buried somewhere between his silence and his secrets, but I was not dead, and I was absolutely not ready to lose. I needed to know everything. I needed to know who she was, how long it had been, and exactly how much of our life he had stolen to build his paradise with her. I walked into the bedroom, changed into my pajamas, and climbed into the empty side of the bed. When Evan finally came out of the bathroom, smelling of soap and deception, I closed my eyes and breathed evenly, pretending to be asleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to him settle in beside me, feeling the heat of his body, a body that had been touching someone else only hours ago. Tomorrow, I would start counting. Tomorrow, I would start watching. Tonight, I would let him sleep, secure in his arrogance, thinking he was the only one in this house capable of keeping a secret. The morning after I saw Evan holding another woman's hand, I did not scream. I did not throw his clothes onto the lawn. I went to a stationery store 3 towns over and bought a black moleskin notebook. It was small enough to fit in the inside pocket of my purse, but thick enough to hold the wreckage of my marriage. If Evan was going to treat our life like a fiction, he could rewrite at will. Then I was going to be the editor who documented every single inconsistency in his draft. I began to track him with the precision of a forensic accountant. On the first page, I created a grid: date, time of departure, stated destination, time of return, actual physical condition upon return. The data began to accumulate immediately. On Wednesday, he claimed he had a site inspection in Northwood that would run until 8. He left the house at 6 in the morning. When he returned at 9 at night, his boots were clean, not a speck of mud, not a trace of the red clay dust that defines Northwood construction sites. He smelled of steak and red wine, not sweat and drywall. I wrote it down. I moved on to the digital footprint. In the past, whenever Evan went on a business trip, the confirmation emails would flood our shared inbox. Flight itineraries from Delta, hotel confirmations from Marriott, rental car agreements. It was automatic. Now, when I searched the server for his upcoming trip to Chicago, a trip he had mentioned casually over dinner 2 nights prior, the search bar returned 0 results. There was no flight. There was no hotel. I checked the trash folder. I checked the spam folder. Nothing. He was not booking these trips through his corporate account. Or if he was, he had changed the forwarding settings to a private email address I did not know existed. Then came the money. I spent an entire afternoon downloading our bank statements for the last 12 months. I exported them into a spreadsheet, color-coding every expense. I looked for the smoking gun, the jewelry store receipt, the hotel charge, the expensive dinners. I found nothing. The credit card statements were terrifyingly boring. Gas, groceries, utilities. His personal card showed a few lunches, but always at places like Subway or Chipotle, totally consistent with a busy workday. It did not make sense until I looked at the cash withdrawals. They were small. $60 here, $80 there, $200 on a Friday. They were frequent enough to look like walking around money. But when I summed them up over the last 6 months, the total was over $4,000. He was bleeding our account dry in increments small enough to avoid detection, converting our marital assets into a ghost currency that could not be traced. He was paying for dinners, gifts, and perhaps even hotel rooms with cash. It was disciplined. It was calculated. It was the behavior of a man who had been planning this deception for a long time. I needed professional help. I made an appointment with Harrison and Cole Legal, a firm in the city known for handling high-net-worth divorces. I paid the consultation fee in cash from my own savings so it would not appear on our joint statement. The office was intimidating, all glass walls and polished mahogany, designed to make you feel small so you would trust the people who felt big. The attorney assigned to me was a man named Mr. Henderson. He was older, with silver hair and eyes that looked like they had seen the death of love 1,000 times. He listened to my story without interrupting. He looked at my notebook. He looked at the spreadsheet printouts I had brought. Then he took off his glasses and leaned forward. "Mrs. Garza," he said, his voice dry and professional. What you have here is suspicion. It is strong suspicion, but it is not proof. In this state, you can file for a no-fault divorce. You can leave him tomorrow, but if you want to claim a larger share of the assets, or if you want to prove dissipation of marital funds, which means proving he spent your family money on this affair, you need concrete evidence. He paused to let the weight of the legal system settle on my shoulders. If you confront him now without proof, he will hide the money. He will delete the accounts. He will claim those cash withdrawals were for contractors or tips. He will destroy the paper trail before a subpoena can even be typed. You will walk away with half of what is visible, and he will keep everything he has hidden. Do you understand? I nodded. I felt a cold nausea rising in my throat. You need to be patient, he continued. You need names. You need dates that correlate with credit card activity that we cannot see yet. You need to know where he is staying, but you must obtain this information legally. Do not hack his email. Do not put a GPS tracker on his car if the car is registered solely in his name. Do not record his conversations without his consent. If you do those things, the evidence will be inadmissible, and you could face criminal charges. You have to watch. You have to wait. You have to let him make a mistake. I left the office feeling heavier than when I arrived. The path forward was not a sprint to freedom. It was a marathon of deception. I had to go back to that house. I had to sleep in that bed. I had to look him in the eye and lie, just as he was lying to me. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in acting. I became the perfect wife. I asked him about his day with a smile plastered on my face. When he complained about a difficult client, I offered sympathy. When he said he had to work late, I told him not to worry about dinner. I watched him text under the table, his face illuminated by the blue light, and I forced myself to look away, to pretend I was interested in the television. Living with a liar changes your perception of reality. You start to analyze every micro-expression. One evening, he came home with a new shirt. It was a blue button-down, slightly more fitted than what he usually wore. "Nice shirt," I said, "chopping vegetables for a salad." He stiffened. Just for a fraction of a second, his shoulders went up. "Oh, this?" I spilled coffee on my other one. Had to grab something quick from the mall. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie because Evan hates shopping. He would rather wear a coffee-stained shirt for the rest of the day than walk into a clothing store on a Tuesday. That shirt was a gift. I could feel it. I wanted to grab the collar and check the tag, to see if it was a brand he would never pick for himself. But I didn't. I just smiled and said, "It brings out your eyes." The nights were the hardest. We still slept in the same king-sized bed. In the past, we would drift toward the center during the night, a tangle of limbs seeking warmth. Now, there was an invisible wall between us. I stayed on my edge of the mattress, my back turned to him. I could hear his breathing. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. It was a form of psychological torture to lie next to someone you know intimately, yet know not at all. I knew the scar on his knee from a childhood bike accident. I knew the sound he made when he was dreaming. I knew how he liked his coffee, but I did not know who he was texting at midnight. I did not know who he was laughing with at lunch. I lay there in the dark, staring at the shadows on the wall, feeling like I was sharing a bed with a stranger who was wearing my husband's skin. The isolation was absolute. I could not tell my friends because I was not ready for their pity or their advice. I could not tell my mother because she would worry herself sick. I was alone in a house of cards, holding my breath so I would not blow it down before I was ready. I continued to gather my scraps of evidence. I found a parking receipt from a garage in the downtown theater district, time-stamped for a Thursday afternoon when he was supposed to be in a meeting. I found a wrapper for a mint chocolate truffle in his coat pocket. Evan hates mint. I took photos of everything with my phone, uploading them to a secure cloud account that I had password protected with a code he would never guess. By the end of the month, I had a timeline. I had a pattern. I knew that Tuesdays and Thursdays were the days he saw her. I knew that his business trips always coincided with weekends where the construction schedule was light. I was building a dossier, a paper monument to his betrayal. It was a rainy Tuesday in November. Evan had called to say he would be late again. A frantic client, he said. A zoning issue. I hung up the phone and added the lie to my spreadsheet. I was sitting at the dining room table. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window pane. I had my laptop open. I was organizing the files into folders: financials, timeline, inconsistencies. I was preparing the narrative that I would eventually hand over to Mr. Henderson. I was not just a wife anymore. I was a prosecutor building a case. I looked at the folder labeled Divorce Draft. It contained the preliminary forms Mr. Henderson had given me. I had filled out the basic information: name, address, date of marriage. It felt surreal to reduce 8 years of life into fill-in-the-blank boxes. I was staring at the line that asked for the reason for dissolution, my finger hovering over the keyboard, wondering how to summarize the destruction of my world in a single sentence. And then, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, jarring sound that sliced through the silence of the house. I jumped, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was not expecting anyone. It was 7 in the evening. It was raining. We never had visitors this late on a weeknight. I closed the laptop lid instinctively, hiding my work. I walked to the front door, smoothing down my sweater, composing my face. I expected a delivery driver. I expected a neighbor looking for a lost package. I turned on the porch light and looked through the peephole, but the glass was fogged from the humidity. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The rain was coming down in sheets behind the man standing on my porch. He was tall, wearing a dark trench coat that was damp at the shoulders. He held a black umbrella in one hand and a leather briefcase in the other. He did not look like a delivery man. He looked like something far more serious. He looked like a man who had walked out of a storm to bring another one into my living room. He looked at me with eyes that were calm, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Mrs. Turner?" he asked. I corrected him automatically. I use my maiden name professionally, but in this moment, I just nodded. Yes. He did not smile. He did not apologize for the intrusion. He just stood there, a dark silhouette against the gray rain. "My name is Marcus Hale," he said, "and we need to talk about who your husband is sleeping with." I stepped back from the door, my hand still gripping the cold brass of the deadbolt. The rain was lashing against the porch behind him, a chaotic backdrop to the absolute stillness of the man standing on my welcome mat. He did not wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, shook his umbrella once with a sharp, decisive snap, and placed it in the stand next to Evan's golf clubs. I closed the door, shutting out the storm, but the atmosphere in the hallway had already shifted. It felt pressurized, like the cabin of an airplane right before your ears pop. "You had better come in," I said, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. He nodded, unbuttoning his trench coat to reveal a charcoal gray suit that shouted money. It was tailored to perfection, hugging a frame that was fit and disciplined. He looked about 45 years old, with salt and pepper hair cut short and a jawline that seemed carved from granite. There was no softness in his face, no apology. He moved with the efficiency of a man who did not waste motion or time. We walked into the dining room. My laptop was still on the table, the screen dark, hiding my amateurish attempts at building a divorce case. He glanced at it, his eyes lingering for a fraction of a second too long, as if he knew exactly what I had been doing. "Please, sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair opposite mine. He sat. He placed his leather briefcase on the table between us. It was heavy. I could hear the thud it made against the wood. It sounded like a gavel. "I am going to be direct. Mrs. Turner," he said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth but utterly devoid of emotional inflection. It was a boardroom voice. "My name is Marcus Hale. I own a venture capital firm in the city, and as I said at the door, my wife is currently sleeping with your husband." Hearing it out loud, spoken by a stranger in my dining room, felt like a physical blow. It was one thing to suspect it, to track it on a spreadsheet, to smell another woman's perfume. It was another thing entirely to have a man look you in the eye and confirm that your life was a lie. "Who is she?" I asked. The question came out as a whisper. He did not answer immediately, Instead, he reached for the latches of his briefcase. They clicked open with a sound that was too loud in the quiet room. He reached inside and pulled out a file. It was not a thin manila folder. It was a thick binder, organized with color-coded tabs. "Her name is Lydia Cross," he said, sliding a photograph across the polished wood of the table. "She is 31 years old. She is a freelance consultant specializing in project communications and public relations for large-scale development firms. That is how they met. She was brought in to handle the community outreach for the Stonebridge project your husband is managing." I looked at the photograph. It was a professional headshot. She was beautiful. There was no denying it. She had dark eyes, high cheekbones, and a smile that looked both inviting and intelligent. This was not a bimbo Evan had picked up at a bar. This was a woman of substance, a peer. That hurt worse. Marcus continued to slide photos across the table, dealing them out like a tarot reader predicting a tragic future. "Here they are on October 14th, he said. The photo showed them walking out of a hotel in the city. Evan's hand was on the small of her back. "October 22nd, he said, placing another one down. They were in a park. They were sitting on a bench, eating sandwiches. It looked so domestic, so normal. "November 3rd, he said. This was the one that broke me. They were at a dinner party, presumably a work function given the attire. They were standing in a corner, away from the crowd. Evan was looking down at her, and he was laughing. His head was thrown back, his eyes crinkled at the corners, his guard completely down. I stared at that image until my vision blurred. I knew that laugh. I knew exactly what it sounded like. It was a deep, resonant sound that used to make me feel like I was the funniest, most important person in the world. I had not heard that laugh in 3 years, maybe 4. Seeing him give it to Lydia Cross, freely, easily, joyfully, felt like watching him hand her a piece of my soul. "He looks happy," I said, the words tasting like bile. "He looks compromised," Marcus corrected. I looked up at him. Marcus was not looking at the photos. He was looking at me. His expression was unreadable. He was not grieving. He did not look like a husband who had just discovered his wife's infidelity. He looked like a surgeon evaluating a patient's chances of survival. "I have been tracking them for 4 months, Marcus said. "I have their text logs. I have their credit card cross-references. I know where they meet. I know what they eat. I know that they are currently looking for an apartment together in the West End." "An apartment?" I choked out. "Yes, they intend to leave us. Mrs. Turner. They are currently in the process of moving assets. They are planning to blindside us both in January, after the holiday bonuses are paid out." I felt the room spin. January. That was 2 months away. Evan was planning to play happy family through Christmas, open presents with me, perhaps kiss me at midnight on New Year's Eve, all while planning his exit strategy with Lydia. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, pushing the photos away as if they were radioactive. "Do you want to confront them together? Is that it? You want to storm into their little love nest and catch them in the act?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, but it did not reach his eyes. "No," he said, "I have no interest in melodrama. I do not want a scene, and I certainly do not want a confrontation that allows them to control the narrative." "Then what do you want?" I asked. "You want to swap evidence? You want my lawyer to talk to your lawyer so we can coordinate the divorce filings?" I thought I understood him. I thought he was a fellow victim seeking an alliance. I thought we were 2 drowning people reaching out to hold on to the same raft. I was wrong. Marcus Hale leaned forward again, clasping his hands on the table. The movement was slow, deliberate, and predatory. "I do not want an alliance, Mrs. Turner," he said quietly. "I want an acquisition." I frowned, confused by his choice of words. "Excuse me?" "If we divorce them now," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming even more intense, "we lose. We get half of the marital assets, perhaps some alimony if the judge is generous. They get to be together. They get to walk away into their sunset, feeling justified, feeling like their love conquered the obstacle of their boring spouses. They win." He paused, letting the word win hang in the air between us. I do not like to lose, Marcus said, and looking at you. Kimberly. May I call you Kimberly? I do not think you like to lose either. You have been tracking him. You have that notebook in your purse. You have been playing the part of the dutiful wife while plotting your escape. I admire that. It shows discipline. I felt a shiver run down my spine. He had noticed everything. So, Marcus continued, I am not here to offer you a shoulder to cry on. I am here to offer you a job. A job? I asked, incredulous. I am going to destroy them, Marcus said. The statement was spoken with the casual tone of someone ordering coffee. Not physically. I am a civilized man. I am going to destroy their lives. I am going to dismantle their reputations, their careers, and their financial futures. I am going to make sure that by the time we are done with them, they will not only hate each other, but they will wish they had never met. But I cannot do it alone. I need someone on the inside. I need you. He stood up, smoothing his suit jacket. He did not give me time to process the sheer insanity of what he was saying. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was heavy. Black cardstock with gold lettering. It had an address and a time written on the back in elegant handwriting. This is not a conversation for a dining room table, he said. Meet me at this address tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Come alone. Tell no one. If you decide not to show up, I will understand. I will file for divorce on Monday, and you can take your chances with your husband's lawyers. He looked down at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something human in his eyes. It was not kindness. It was recognition. He saw the rage burning underneath my shock. But if you do show up, he said softly, I promise you one thing. You will not just walk away from this marriage. You will walk away with everything. He turned and walked to the door. I sat frozen in my chair, surrounded by the glossy evidence of my husband's betrayal. I heard the front door open and close. The click of the latch was final. I looked at the card in my hand. Marcus Hale, Hale Ventures. I looked at the photo of Evan laughing with Lydia. I thought about the last 8 years. I thought about the cold dinners. I thought about the gaslighting. I thought about the way he made me feel small and invisible. Marcus Hale did not want to just divorce them. He wanted to burn their world down, and he was inviting me to hold the match. I listened to the rain outside. It sounded different now. It didn't sound like a storm anymore. It sounded like applause. I knew, even as I sat there trembling, that I would be at that address at 10 o'clock. I knew that the Kimberly who had just wanted a fair settlement was gone. Marcus had seen something in me that Evan had missed for a decade. He saw that I was not just a wife. I was a weapon waiting to be aimed. The next morning would not just be a meeting. It would be the beginning of a war, and for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The address on the card led to the penthouse level of the St. Regis, specifically to a private lounge reserved for members whose net worth likely exceeded the GDP of a small country. The air up here was different. It smelled of old leather, polished mahogany, and the terrifying silence that only extreme wealth can purchase. There was no background music, no clinking of silverware, only the muted rustle of silk and the soft turn of newspaper pages. Marcus Hale was waiting for me at a corner table by the window. The view of the city was panoramic, a gray sprawl under the morning rain, but he was not looking at the view. He was reading a document on a tablet, a cup of espresso untouched beside him. When I approached, he stood up immediately. It was a reflex of old-school manners that felt disarming given the nuclear bomb he had dropped in my living room the night before. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. I sat down. I had dressed in my best blazer, the one I wore for meetings with publishers, but I still felt underdressed. I felt like a tourist in a land where I did not speak the language. "I told you I would come," I said, placing my purse on the floor. "I want to know what you meant by acquisition." Marcus signaled a waiter with a barely perceptible nod. I ordered a black coffee. Once the waiter had retreated, vanishing as if he had never existed. Marcus reached down and lifted the same leather briefcase he had brought to my house. He placed it on the table. He did not open it immediately. He rested his hand on the lid. "Kimberly," he started, his voice low and steady. "Divorce is usually an emotional transaction. People want justice. They want validation. They want to hurt the person who hurt them. But the legal system is not designed for emotions. It is a calculator. It subtracts assets and divides liabilities. If you divorce Evan today, you will get half of the house, half of his 401k, and perhaps some spousal support for a few years." He paused, looking me in the eye. "You will walk away with maybe $400,000 or $500,000 in total assets. You will survive, but Evan will also survive. He will keep his job. He will keep his reputation. He will keep Lydia. And in 2 years, he will have rebuilt everything he lost. He will be happy." The word hung in the air, sharp and bitter. "I do not want him to be happy," I said. "I want him to understand what he did." Marcus nodded. Then he unlatched the briefcase. "Then you need to stop thinking like a scorned wife and start thinking like a shareholder." He turned the briefcase toward me. Inside, there were no photos of illicit dinners or secret kisses. Instead, there were stacks of documents bound in blue legal covers. On top of the stack was a letterhead from a bank I recognized as one of the oldest in Switzerland. And right in the center was a cashier's check confirmation, a photocopy of a transfer that had been executed that morning. I looked at the number. I blinked and looked again, certain that my brain was misfiring due to lack of sleep. It was not $500,000. It was not $5 million. It was $100 million. The number was written out in black ink, crisp and undeniable. 100 million US dollars. I stared at it. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sounds of the lounge faded into a white noise buzz. I looked up at Marcus. He was watching my reaction with clinical detachment. "What is this?" I asked. My voice shook. Are you trying to buy me?" "No," Marcus said. "I am funding an operation. That money is currently sitting in an escrow account managed by a third-party trustee. It is a performance bond. It is yours, entirely and irrevocably, provided you agree to my terms." I laughed. It was a dry, nervous sound. "You want to pay me $100 million to divorce my husband? That doesn't make any sense. You could hire a hitman for $10,000. Marcus did not smile. "I do not want him dead. Kimberly, I want him ruined. And to do that, I need time. This money is not for the divorce. It is for the delay." He pulled a document from the stack and slid it over the check. It was a contract. "The condition is simple," he explained. "You cannot file for divorce for exactly 90 days. You cannot confront Evan. You cannot let him know that you know about Lydia. You cannot let him know that you have met me. You must continue to live in that house, sleep in that bed, and play the role of the oblivious, supportive wife for 3 more months." "Why?" I asked. "Why 90 days?" "Because Evan is not just cheating on you," Marcus said. "He is cheating on everyone." Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that was barely audible over the rain hitting the window. "My wife, Lydia, is not just his lover. She is his accomplice. Evan is a project manager at Stonebridge. Lydia handles the PR. Together, they have set up a shell company that is currently billing Stonebridge for materials that are never delivered and consulting services that are never rendered. They are skimming approximately 8% off the top of every contract Evan manages." I felt the blood drain from my face. Evan was boring. Evan was safe. Evan worried about credit card points and gas mileage. The idea that he was embezzling corporate funds sounded like a plot from one of the thrillers I edited. Not the biography of the man who forgot to take out the recycling on Tuesdays. He wouldn't," I stammered. "He's too cautious." "He was cautious," Marcus corrected. "Until he met Lydia. She is ambitious. She convinced him that he was undervalued, that he deserved more. They have been running this scheme for 6 months, but right now, the amounts are small. They are testing the waters. If we strike now, if we expose the affair and the divorce gets messy, Stonebridge will look into his accounts. They will find the irregularities, but it will look like minor mismanagement. He might get fired, but he won't go to prison. He will settle out of court, claim it was an error, and walk away." Marcus tapped the table with his index finger. But in 2 weeks, Stonebridge is breaking ground on the riverfront project. It is a massive development. Evan is the lead manager. Lydia has already set up the vendor contracts. Once that project starts, the money they intend to siphon will move from thousands into millions. They are going to get greedy. They are going to get sloppy. And in 90 days, specifically on the 15th of February, the quarterly audit happens. I began to see the shape of the trap. You want them to steal it, I said. I want them to steal enough to ensure that when the hammer drops, they go away for 20 years, Marcus said. I want them to be so confident, so arrogant in their success, that they sign their names on documents that will bury them. But for that to happen, Evan needs to feel safe. He needs to feel that his home life is stable. If he senses you are suspicious, if he thinks a divorce is looming, he will panic. He will freeze the accounts. He will destroy the hard drives. He will spook. He sat back. I am buying his comfort, Kimberly, and you are the one who has to sell it to him. I looked down at the contract again. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but the terms were clear. The beneficiary, Kimberly Garza, agrees to maintain marital residence, agrees to defer all legal filings, agrees to assist the grantor, Marcus Hale, in the collection of domestic evidence. $100 million. It was an obscene amount of money. It was enough to buy an island. It was enough to never edit another terrible manuscript again. It was enough to protect my children, if I had them, for 10 generations. But why? I asked, looking at him. You could just turn them in now. Why spend this much? Marcus looked out the window. For a moment, the mask slipped. I saw a flash of something ancient and terrible in his face. Because Lydia signed a prenuptial agreement, he said, if I divorce her for adultery, she gets nothing. If I divorce her for no cause, she gets 10 million. But if she is convicted of a federal felony involving financial fraud, not only does she get nothing, but I can seize the assets she tried to hide. It is not about saving money. Kimberly, it is about the principle. She looked me in the face for 2 years and lied. She used my connections to build her career. She introduced me to Evan at a gala and shook his hand while they were laughing at me inside. He turned back to me. I have a net worth of over $2 billion. 100 million is a rounding error to me. But to you, it is a new life. It is freedom. It is the power to look at Evan Turner when this is all over and know that you did not just survive him. You sold him. I reached out and touched the paper. The texture was smooth, expensive. Everything is legal, Marcus added. The funds are already in the trust. The taxes are prepaid. My lawyers have structured this as a consulting fee for a private investigation. You will have to pay income tax on it, which is substantial, but you will still clear enough to never worry about a bill for the rest of your life. I thought about Evan. I thought about the way he turned his phone over. I thought about the way he touched Lydia's hand in the bistro. I thought about the last 8 years of mediocrity, of convincing myself that being ignored was the same thing as being loved. If I signed this, I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a player. I was an active participant in his destruction. I picked up the pen that Marcus had placed next to the briefcase. It was a heavy fountain pen, black lacquer and gold. 90 days? I asked. 90 days, Marcus confirmed. Can you do it? Can you look him in the eye and lie better than he has lied to you? I uncapped the pen. The ink was black. I thought about the actor I had become over the last 3 weeks. I thought about the cold knot in my chest that had replaced my heart. I am a very good editor. Marcus, I said, I know how to fix a story. I signed my name, Kimberly Garza. The letters looked sharp, aggressive. Marcus closed the briefcase. He did not shake my hand. This was not a deal between friends. It was a conspiracy. The funds will be released to your control the moment the divorce papers are filed. 90 days from today, he said. Until then, you have a line of credit for expenses related to the charade. My assistant will be in touch with a secure phone. He stood up. Do not disappoint me. Kimberly, Evan thinks he is the main character in this story. He has no idea he has already been written out. I watched him walk away, moving with the silent grace of a shark in deep water. I sat there alone in the penthouse lounge, the contract folded into my purse. I looked out at the rain over the city. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't mind the bitterness. I wasn't the wife waiting at home anymore. I was the one holding the stopwatch. 90 days. I checked my watch. The countdown had already begun. The first week of my 90-day contract with Marcus Hale felt like learning to breathe underwater. Every instinct I had screamed at me to surface, to gasp for air, to scream the truth at Evan's face. But I forced myself to stay submerged in the lie. I became a creature of two existences. There was the Kimberly who made coffee at 7 in the morning and asked her husband if he wanted his blue tie or his red tie. And then there was the Kimberly who waited until the garage door closed to pull a burner phone out from the hollowed-out bottom of a decorative vase in the living room. Marcus had provided the phone via courier 2 days after our meeting at the St. Regis. It was a nondescript black smartphone, encrypted, with only one number saved in the contacts list. He called it the lifeline. I called it the detonator. My performance had to be flawless. I could not be cold, because coldness breeds suspicion. I could not be over-affectionate, because suddenly changing my behavior would trigger his radar just as fast. I had to be exactly who I had been for the last 8 years. Present, pleasant, and slightly boring. So, I asked him about the Stonebridge project. I listened as he spun elaborate webs of fiction about permit delays and difficult city council members. I nodded sympathetically when he complained about his boss. It was fascinating, in a morbid way, to watch him work. I realized that Evan did not just lie to protect himself. He lied because he enjoyed the architecture of it. He was building a false reality with the same attention to detail he applied to his condos. The shift happened on a Tuesday evening, 10 days into the countdown. Evan came home looking theatrically exhausted. He rubbed his temples. He sighed as he loosened his shoes. He poured himself a glass of scotch, something he rarely did on a weeknight, and sat heavily on the sofa. I walked in from the kitchen, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "Rough day?" I asked, hitting my mark perfectly. He looked up at me with eyes that were practiced in their weariness. "It is the commute. Kim," he said. He used the nickname he knew I liked. "The riverfront site is killing me. It took me an hour and 45 minutes to get home tonight. Traffic on the bridge is a nightmare. And with the groundbreaking coming up, I am going to be pulling 14-hour days. I don't know if I can keep doing this drive back and forth. It is dangerous. I almost fell asleep at the wheel twice." It was a beautiful setup. He was appealing to my concern for his safety. He was framing his abandonment of our home as a necessity for his health. I sat down on the arm of the sofa and touched his shoulder. The fabric of his shirt felt cool. I wondered if Lydia had touched him there earlier. "That sounds terrible." "Evan," I said, "what are you thinking?" He took a sip of scotch, buying a second of time to deliver the line he had probably rehearsed in the mirror. "I was thinking, maybe I should crash in the city during the week, just until the heavy lifting phase is over. The company has a corporate housing allowance. I could get a small place near the site. It would save me 3 hours of driving a day. I could actually sleep." He looked at me, waiting for the pushback. He expected me to complain about being alone. He expected the clinging wife. I forced a look of concern onto my face. "If it is safer, Evan, then you should do it," I said. "I don't want you driving when you are that tired." It makes sense. Relief washed over his face, followed immediately by a flicker of guilt that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He had gotten the green light. He thought he had manipulated me. He had no idea I was opening the door for him to hang himself. That weekend, he went apartment hunting. Of course, he didn't need to hunt. He and Lydia had likely picked the place weeks ago. He came back on Sunday afternoon with a spring in his step, claiming he had found a modest studio near the water. It wasn't until Tuesday that he made the mistake. Evan is a creature of habit. When he comes home, he drops his leather work bag on the bench in the mudroom. Usually, he takes his laptop out immediately, but that evening, He went straight upstairs to change, leaving the bag unattended. My heart rate didn't even spike. I walked into the mudroom. I listened for the creak of the floorboards upstairs. I heard the shower turning on. I opened the bag. It was organized chaos inside. Blueprints, tape measures, a tablet, and there, tucked into the side pocket, was a folded document. I pulled it out. It was a lease agreement. I scanned it quickly. The apartment was not a modest studio. It was a 2-bedroom penthouse suite at the Avery, one of the most expensive buildings in the West End. The monthly rent was $6,500. But the most important detail was the name. The lease was not in the name of Stonebridge Development. It was not a corporate housing agreement. It was signed Evan Turner. He had signed a personal liability for a luxury apartment while married to me, using funds that were technically marital assets to pay the security deposit, and he had rented a 2-bedroom, one room for him, one room, presumably, for the woman who was helping him steal from his company. I pulled out my phone, my real phone, and took 4 high-resolution photos of the document. I captured the signature page. I captured the dates. I captured the rent amount. Then, I folded the paper exactly along the existing creases and slid it back into the side pocket of his bag. I zipped it up. I walked back into the kitchen and started chopping onions for dinner. When Evan came downstairs, smelling of soap and satisfaction, I was humming. "Found a place?" I asked without looking up. "Yeah," he said, grabbing a carrot stick from the counter. "Nothing fancy, just a place to crash." "That sounds practical," I said. Later that night, while Evan was pretending to read in bed, I went down to the laundry room. I retrieved the burner phone and sent the images to Marcus via the encrypted messaging app he had installed. The response came 3 minutes later. "Perfect," Marcus wrote. "This is the keystone. By signing in his own name, he has established a secondary residence without your consent using marital funds. This is legal proof of dissipation of assets. But more importantly, it creates a physical location for the investigation." I typed back, "He says it is a studio. It is a 2-bedroom penthouse." Marcus replied, "Of course it is. Lydia likes a view. We will have cameras in the hallway by tomorrow. We will have logs of every time she enters and exits. Good work. Kimberly." I stared at the screen. A strange sensation settled over me. For months, I had felt like a victim. I had felt like the woman who was being left behind, the fool who didn't know her husband was in love with someone else. But staring at those cold, digital words from Marcus, the feeling of victimhood evaporated. I wasn't the victim. I was the operative. Evan wasn't leaving me. I was letting him go on a leash that was getting shorter by the day. Every lie he told me was another dollar in my bank account. Every time he kissed me on the cheek and told me he would miss me during the week, he was digging his own grave. I went back upstairs and climbed into bed next to him. "Good night, honey," Evan said, turning off the lamp. "Good night, Evan," I replied. I closed my eyes and slept better than I had in years. 2 days later, Evan moved out. I helped him pack. I folded his shirts. I put his toiletries in a travel bag. I stood in the driveway and waved as he backed his car out, watching him drive away toward his new life with Lydia. He looked so relieved. He thought he had won. He thought he had pulled off the perfect crime. I went back inside the quiet house. The burner phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Marcus. "The bird is in the cage. Lydia arrived at the apartment 10 minutes ago. They are now cohabitating. Phase 1 is complete." I sat down on the sofa where Evan had lied to me about his commute. The silence in the house didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like anticipation. Then a second message appeared. "Now we feed them." Marcus wrote, "Tomorrow. I need you to do something that will make them feel invincible. We need them to get greedy. We are going to offer Evan a promotion." I looked at the phone and smiled. A promotion. Marcus was going to lift Evan up to the highest peak, just so the fall would shatter every bone in his body. "Tell me what to do," I typed back. The game had changed. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was about to help Marcus hand them the rope. The surveillance reports arrived every morning at 8 o'clock, delivered via a secure server that Marcus had set up for me, In the beginning, I used to open them with a trembling hand, afraid of the pain they would inflict. Now, 30 days into the operation, I opened them with the cold efficiency of an auditor looking for a discrepancy in a tax return. The emotion had been cauterized. What remained was a hunger for data. The team Marcus had hired was not a couple of guys in a van with binoculars. This was a forensic intelligence unit. They did not just watch. They scraped the world for digital exhaust. I had access to toll booth records, parking garage logs, and credit card timestamps that painted a portrait of my husband's life in high-definition resolution. The file labeled November 20th contained a series of photographs taken with a telephoto lens. The subject line read, "Domestic acquisition, pottery barn, downtown location." I clicked through the images. Evan and Lydia were not hiding in the shadows. They were shopping. They walked through the aisles of the home goods store with the casual entitlement of a married couple. In one photo, Evan was holding up a set of beige linen curtains, looking at Lydia for approval. In another, they were testing the weight of expensive steak knives. I zoomed in on image number 12. They were standing in front of the espresso machines. Evan was pointing at a dual boiler model, the kind that cost nearly $2,000. I recognized his expression. It was the face of a man justifying a luxury purchase as a necessity. He had made that same face 8 years ago when we bought our dining room table. The report noted the transaction details below the image. Purchase made at 11:42 in the morning. Total amount, $2,450. Paid via cash. He was furnishing their love nest with the same cash he had been siphoning from our joint existence. But what struck me wasn't the money. It was the domesticity of it. They weren't just having sex. They were building a home. They were choosing the backdrop for their mornings together. They were deciding what kind of coffee they would drink while laughing about how easily they had fooled me. I saved the file to the master drive. Evidence item number 412. The danger with living a double life, however, is that the brain struggles to maintain two separate operating systems. Evan was getting sloppy. The arrogance that Marcus had predicted was setting in. He felt safe. He felt like he had successfully partitioned his hard drive, but the data was beginning to bleed over. He came back to our house on a Thursday evening to pick up some winter clothes he claimed he needed for the drafty apartment. We were standing in the hallway. He looked around the foyer, frowning. "Did the super fix that leak in the lobby yet?" he asked. I stared at him. We live in a single-family colonial house in the suburbs. We do not have a lobby. We do not have a super. We have a front porch and a plumber named Mike who comes over when the pipes freeze. I tilted my head, feigning confusion. "What lobby?" "Evan?" I asked. He froze. I saw the gears grinding in his head as he realized he had just superimposed the reality of the Avery onto our home. His eyes darted to the left, a tell I had cataloged weeks ago. "I meant at the office," he stammered. "The lobby at Stonebridge. There was a leak near the elevators. It's been driving me crazy. Just tired. Kim, my brain is fried." I smiled, a soft, understanding smile that did not reach my eyes. "You work too hard," I said. "You should get some rest." He exhaled, thinking he had stuck the landing. He didn't know that the moment he left. I logged the time and the exact quote into the dossier. Subject confused primary residence with secondary illicit residence. Verbal confirmation of apartment amenities. But the domestic betrayal was just the surface noise. The real signal came from Marcus later that week. I met him in a different location this time. A sterile, glass-walled conference room in a co-working space downtown that he had rented under a shell company. He did not bring the briefcase. He brought a projector. "We need to look at the vendor list," Marcus said, dimming the lights. A spreadsheet appeared on the wall. It was a list of subcontractors for the riverfront project, concrete suppliers, electrical consultants, steel fabricators. Marcus pointed a laser pointer at a line item near the bottom. Crossflow Solutions, LLC. "Does that name ring a bell?" Marcus asked. I shook my head. "No. It shouldn't," Marcus said, "because it was incorporated only 4 months ago. The registered agent is a lawyer in Delaware. which hides the owner. But we dug into the metadata of their invoicing software. The invoices are created on a laptop with a MAC address that matches the device Lydia Cross logs into her personal email with. He clicked to the next slide. It was a copy of an invoice for strategic community outreach and crisis management consultation. The amount was $18,500. It was approved and signed by Evan Turner, Senior Project Manager. She is billing him, I said, realizing the elegance of the theft. She bills the project for services that are vague enough to be unprovable, Marcus explained. Crisis management, consulting. Who can say if she gave advice or not? Evan signs off on it as the project lead. Stonebridge pays the invoice. The money goes into Crossflow Solutions. And then, he clicked again. A bank statement appeared. Crossflow Solutions transferred $12,000 to a generic account called Blue Horizon Holdings. And Blue Horizon pays the rent at the Avery. Marcus finished. Evan is essentially using his company's money to pay for his mistress's apartment, and they are laundering it through a fake vendor contract. It is fraud, I whispered. It is wire fraud, Marcus corrected. It is embezzlement, and because they are using the mail and interstate banking wires to do it, it is a federal crime. He turned off the projector. The room went dark, save for the city lights outside. But 18,000 is small potatoes, Marcus said. It is barely a blip on a $50 million construction budget. Stonebridge wouldn't even prosecute over that. They would just fire him. We need more. What do we need? I asked. We need the big hit, Marcus said. We need them to get greedy. And according to my sources, the steel procurement contracts are coming up for review next week. That is a $2 million purchase order. If my theory is correct, Evan is going to try to route that through a broker controlled by Lydia. He looked at me. We need to make sure he feels secure enough to make that move. How is he acting? He is comfortable, I said. He bought an espresso machine. He thinks I am an idiot. Good, Marcus said. Keep him comfortable, because the trap is about to snap shut. The final piece of the domestic puzzle fell into place on Saturday. The surveillance team sent over a video file from the parking garage of the Avery. It showed Evan's SUV pulling into his reserved spot. He got out and opened the trunk. He wasn't carrying groceries. He was lifting two large, hard-shell suitcases. They were silver. I recognized them. They were the suitcases we had bought for our honeymoon in Italy. He wheeled them to the elevator. A minute later, Lydia appeared in the frame. She wasn't just visiting. She was carrying a box of books and a garment bag. They were moving in. Not just sleeping over. Moving in. I forwarded the video to Mr. Henderson, my lawyer, who was now working in tandem with Marcus. His reply came via text. Cohabitation confirmed. Abandonment of marital residence confirmed. We have enough for the divorce filing to be a slaughter, but we wait for the criminal charges. I sat in my empty living room. The house was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator humming. I looked at the silver suitcases on my screen. I remembered packing them for Rome. I remembered how careful Evan was to make sure they didn't get scratched. Now, he was using them to move his life into another woman's orbit. My phone rang. It was Evan. I let it ring twice before answering, pitching my voice to the perfect frequency of a naive wife. Hey, honey, I said. Hey, Kim, Evan said. His voice was rushed, excited. Listen, something has come up with the project. The investors want a site visit to the West Coast suppliers. I have to fly out to Seattle. Seattle. I looked at the calendar Marcus had shared with me. There was no Stonebridge business in Seattle, but there was a luxury spa resort in the San Juan Islands that Lydia had been browsing on her work computer 2 days ago. Oh, wow, I said. When do you leave? Next Friday, he said. It is going to be a long trip. Kim, probably 10 days. We need to lock down the steel contracts and the logistics. It is a make-or-break moment for the project. Make or break. He had no idea how right he was. 10 days, I asked. That is a long time. I know, he said, feigning regret. But if I pull this off, the bonus will be huge. We can finally take that vacation you wanted. He was promising me a vacation paid for with the money he was stealing to spend on her. The audacity was breathtaking. "Okay, Evan," I said, "do what you have to do. I will hold down the fort." "Thanks, babe. You are the best." I hung up. My hand was shaking, not from sadness, but from adrenaline. I messaged Marcus. He is going to Seattle, 10 days, next Friday. Marcus replied instantly, "It is not Seattle. It is the San Juans, and he is going to sign the fraudulent steel contract before he leaves, so the money clears while they are sipping champagne. This is it. Kimberly, this is the kill shot." I put the phone down. I looked around the house that Evan had abandoned. He thought he was flying to a romantic getaway. He didn't know he was boarding a flight straight into a federal indictment. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine. I didn't drink it. I just held the glass, watching the red liquid settle. "Enjoy your trip, Evan," I whispered to the empty room, "because when you come back, you won't have a home to come back to." The timeline shifted on a Tuesday night, 3 days before his scheduled departure. Evan walked into the kitchen where I was descaling the coffee machine, the old one, not the shiny espresso beast he had bought for the apartment, and cleared his throat. He looked jittery. He was tapping his fingers against his thigh, a nervous tic he developed whenever he had to sell a particularly weak lie. "Plans have changed. Kim," he said, "the investors are panicking. They want to move the timeline up. I can't do the full 10 days right now. I have to fly out tomorrow morning. It is going to be a blitz. 3 days. 72 hours of non-stop meetings to get the steel contract signed, and then I will be back." I stopped wiping the counter and looked at him. 3 days? I repeated. "Yeah," he said, avoiding my eyes. "It is going to be brutal. Red-eye flight, conference rooms, no sleep. I just want to get it over with so I can secure that bonus." It was a pivot. Marcus had predicted this. He told me that when people commit crimes, they get paranoid about leaving their real life for too long. Evan was afraid that if he vanished for 10 days, I might start digging. So he was compressing the betrayal into a tighter, more manageable window. He wasn't going for a long vacation anymore. He was going for a smash and grab. I dried my hands on a towel. I did not ask who was going with him. I did not ask for his flight number. I did not ask the name of the hotel. "Okay," I said simply. "Do you need me to pick up your dry cleaning before you go?" Evan blinked. He stopped tapping his leg. The silence stretched between us, thick and confused. He had braced himself for a fight. He had prepared a defensive monologue about how hard he worked for this family, about how ungrateful I was for questioning his schedule, but I had robbed him of his conflict. I had given him exactly what he asked for, and it threw him off balance. "No," he said slowly, searching my face for a crack in the mask. "No, I got it. Thanks. Kim, you are being really understanding about this." I smiled, and it was the coldest smile I have ever produced. "It is just 3 days. Evan, I want you to win this contract. Go get what you deserve." I meant every word. I wanted him to get exactly what he dared to sign his name to. When he left the next morning, the sun hadn't even risen. The house was gray and silent. He kissed me on the forehead, a dry, perfunctory peck, and walked out the door with his garment bag. I waited until I saw the taillights of his car disappear around the curve of the cul-de-sac. Then I locked the door, poured a cup of coffee, and texted Marcus. "He is mobile. The clock has started." I did not get in my car. I did not follow him. This was the hardest part of the discipline. My instincts screamed at me to drive to the airport, to see it with my own eyes, to scream at them in the departure lounge, but Mr. Henderson, my lawyer, had been explicit. "If you follow them, you are a stalker," he had said. "If you hire a private investigator to follow them, it is surveillance. But if you track them yourself, his lawyer will paint you as unstable, obsessive, and potentially dangerous. Stay home. Let the professionals handle the visuals." So I stayed home. I sat in my living room, surrounded by the silence of a dying marriage, and watched the tragedy unfold on my iPad screen. At 9 in the morning, the first batch of images arrived from Marcus's team. They were not at the commercial terminal. They were at the private airfield on the south side of the city. Stonebridge Development didn't have a corporate jet, which meant Evan had chartered one. Photo number 1. Evan's car parked in the VIP lot. Photo number 2. Lydia getting out of a rideshare vehicle 3 minutes later. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, looking like a celebrity trying to be incognito and failing miserably. Photo number 3. The reunion. This was the image that made my stomach turn. Evan didn't just greet her, he spun her around. He lifted her off the ground. It was the kind of exuberant, youthful passion that belongs in a romantic comedy, not in a dossier of evidence for a federal fraud case. They looked ecstatic. They looked like two people who had just pulled off the heist of the century and were flying away to count their gold. They boarded a Gulfstream G4. Marcus included the flight plan in the file. They weren't going to Seattle. They weren't even going to the San Juan Islands as he had previously hinted. They were going to Cabo San Lucas. 3 days in a 5-star resort in Mexico. The brutal meetings Evan had described were going to involve tequila and ocean views. At noon, my phone rang. It was Marcus. "Are you watching?" he asked. "I saw the flight plan." I said, "Cabo." "Forget the flight plan," Marcus said. His voice was tight, vibrating with a kind of intense energy I hadn't heard before. "The flight is a distraction. Look at the server. I just uploaded the financials." I switched apps on my tablet, opening the secure folder labeled Financial Forensics. A new PDF had appeared. It was a transaction log from the Stonebridge internal accounts, which Marcus's team had been mirroring. I stared at the numbers. "Oh my God," I whispered. Evan hadn't just signed a contract. Before he boarded that plane, he had authorized an emergency procurement order. The document showed a transfer of $2,300,000 to Crossflow Solutions for expedited steel fabrication and logistical rush fees. He pushed the button. Marcus said, "He authorized the wire transfer at 8:15 this morning, right before he met her at the airfield. The money is moving. Kimberly. It has already left Stonebridge's operating account. It is currently sitting in the holding account for Crossflow." "But the steel?" I asked. "Is there any steel?" "There is no steel," Marcus said. "There is no fabrication. There is just an empty warehouse in Delaware and a bank account that Lydia controls. They are going to transfer that money to an offshore entity in the Caymans within 24 hours. They think that once it hits the islands, it is untouchable." I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. This wasn't just skimming anymore. This wasn't padding invoices for a few $1,000s. This was grand larceny. This was the kind of money that people got killed over. "If Stonebridge finds out," I started. "If Stonebridge finds out," Marcus interrupted, "Evan goes to prison for 15 years, minimum. And if you were still legally his wife without this separation of assets we are building, they would freeze your accounts, seize this house, and garnish your future wages to pay back the restitution." He let that sink in. "This is why I needed 90 days, Marcus continued. "I needed them to feel safe enough to steal the retirement money. I needed the number to be so big that no amount of apologizing could fix it. They have crossed the Rubicon. Kimberly, there is no going back for them now." "So what do we do?" I asked. "Do we call the police? Do we call Stonebridge?" "Not yet," Marcus said. "We wait. We need the money to land in the offshore account. We need the crime to be completed. Attempted fraud is one thing. Executed wire fraud and money laundering is another. We need them to spend the money, or at least, try to." He paused. "I have a contact at the resort in Cabo. They booked the presidential suite. It costs $12,000 a night. And guess which credit card they used to secure the room?" "The corporate card?" I guessed. "No," Marcus said. "They used a debit card linked to Crossflow Solutions. They are spending the stolen money on the vacation itself. They are literally eating and drinking the evidence." I looked at the screen again. I saw the wire transfer authorization. I saw Evan's digital signature at the bottom. It looked so confident, so assertive. It was the signature of a man who thought he was smarter than the system. "Marcus," I said, "if we drop this on them, He won't just lose his job. He will lose his life. He will never work again. He will be a felon. I waited for a pang of guilt. I waited to feel sorry for the man I had promised to love and cherish, but I felt nothing. I remembered the way he looked at me in the kitchen, lying about the brutal meetings. I remembered the way he had dismissed me for years. He made his choice, Marcus said softly. He chose the money. He chose her. You are just the person turning on the lights so everyone can see what he did in the dark. I took a deep breath. When does the hammer drop? I asked. They come back on Friday, Marcus said. The Stonebridge quarterly audit, the one I made sure was rescheduled, is on Monday morning, but we aren't going to wait for Monday. What happens on Friday? Marcus's voice dropped lower. On Friday, they land at the private airfield, and you and I are going to be there, but we won't be alone. You are about to see the complete truth. Kimberly, and believe me, the truth has a lot of flashing lights. The line went dead. I put the tablet down. My hands were steady. 3 days. I walked into the bedroom, our bedroom, and opened the closet. I looked at Evan's remaining clothes, the suits he wore to meetings, the shoes he polished on Sundays. It looked like a museum exhibit of a man who no longer existed. The Evan Turner who lived here was a fiction. The real Evan Turner was currently 30,000 feet in the air, holding a glass of champagne, toasting to a fortune that was actually a prison sentence. I started to pack, not for me, for him. I pulled out garbage bags. I didn't fold anything. I swept his shirts, his ties, his socks into the black plastic. I stripped the bed sheets. I cleared his toiletries from the bathroom counter. By the time the sun went down, the house was purged. There was no trace of him left. I sat on the floor of the empty living room, the black bags piled by the door like trash waiting for collection. The countdown had begun. 72 hours. I closed my eyes and imagined the sun in Cabo. I hoped the weather was perfect. I hoped the tequila was expensive. I hoped they enjoyed every single second of their 3 days in paradise. Because when they landed, they were going to find out that hell isn't a place you go to when you die. It is a place you return to when the person you underestimated finally decides to settle the score. I checked my watch. 68 hours to go. The moment I heard Evan's key turn in the lock that Friday evening, I felt a wave of nausea so violent I had to grip the granite countertop of the kitchen island to keep from swaying. I had spent the previous 2 hours methodically unpacking the garbage bags I had filled in a rage, hanging his shirts back on their velvet hangers, aligning his shoes, and restoring the master bedroom to its deceptive state of normalcy. Marcus had been clear in his text message. Do not blow the cover at the finish line. Let him feel safe for 48 more hours. So, I was standing there, the dutiful wife, when Evan walked in. He did not look like a man who had spent 72 hours in brutal contract negotiations. He looked like a man who had just spent 3 days on a yacht. His skin had that specific, flushed undertone that comes from too much equatorial sun. And despite his best efforts to scrub it away, the faint, sweet scent of coconut sunscreen lingered beneath his heavy musk of duty-free cologne. I did it, he announced, dropping his bag, the one that had carried his swim trunks, not his business suits, onto the floor. The contract is signed. The steel is secured. I forced myself to walk over to him. I did not hug him. I stood just outside his personal space, crossing my arms in a way that could be read as casual but was actually a physical barrier. That is great news. Evan, I said, you must be exhausted. I am wiped out. He lied, rubbing his eyes. Just meetings around the clock. But it was worth it. The bonus is going to be substantial. He walked past me to the refrigerator and grabbed a beer. He cracked it open and took a long swallow, his throat working. He looked around the kitchen, and I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He was recalibrating. He was checking to see if the atmosphere had changed, if I had sensed the ghost of Lydia that must have been clinging to him. But I gave him nothing. I was a mirror, reflecting only what he wanted to see, a boring, supportive, slightly distant wife. Actually, Kim, he said, turning to lean against the counter. While I was flying back, I was doing some thinking. "Oh?" I asked. "Yeah, about the commute, about the project." He took another sip of beer, gaining courage. "This next phase, the construction phase, it is going to be intense. The site demands are going to be 24/7. I really don't think I can manage the drive back and forth from here. It is not sustainable." Here it was, the discard. I looked at him calmly. "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "I think I should stay at the apartment in the city full-time," he said. "Just for the next few months. Until the structural work is done. I will come home on weekends, of course, or we can do dinner in the city, but I need to be close to the site." He was watching me closely, expecting resistance. He expected me to cry, to beg him to come home, to complain about the loneliness. He wanted that reaction because it would validate his ego. It would make him feel like the prize we were fighting over. I didn't give it to him. I picked up my tea mug and took a slow sip. "You know, Evan," I said, keeping my voice flat, "I think you are right." He blinked. "I am?" "Yes, you look tired. The drive is dangerous, and honestly," I paused, letting the silence stretch just enough to make him uncomfortable. "I have a lot of editing work coming up, a heavy manuscript. Having the house to myself during the week would actually help me focus." Relief washed over his face, but it was followed instantly by a shadow of confusion. He was glad I was agreeing, but he was insulted that I didn't care more. It was a delicious paradox. "Oh," he said. "Well, good. I am glad we are on the same page." "We are definitely on the same page," I said. By Sunday night, he was gone. He packed the rest of his things, more clothes, his favorite pillow, the few personal items that made him feel grounded, and drove back to the Avery. He thought he was driving toward freedom. He thought he had successfully managed his wife and his mistress, partitioning his life into two neat, non-overlapping circles. He had no idea that the circles were about to collide. On Monday morning, the atmosphere changed. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I sat in my home office with the door open, the house silent and empty of his presence. My phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "The auditors are in the building." The message read, "Showtime." Marcus had orchestrated the timing with the precision of a conductor. He had used his influence as a major investor, through 3 layers of shell companies, to trigger a random internal audit of the riverfront project. It wasn't a criminal investigation yet. It was just corporate hygiene. But to a man with a guilty conscience and a fraudulent wire transfer of $2,300,000 on his ledger, it would feel like the apocalypse. I waited. At 11:30 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Evan. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 11:32. I answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello?" I sounded distracted, like he was interrupting my work. "Kim," he said. His voice was tight, breathless. He sounded like he was walking fast, perhaps pacing in a stairwell or hiding in his car. "Everything okay?" I asked. Yeah, everything is fine," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Listen, I might be late coming home this weekend. In fact, I might not be able to make it back for a couple of weeks." "Why?" I asked. "The company, Stonebridge, they sprang a surprise audit on us today." He said, "Just standard procedure, you know, bureaucracy. But they are freezing all the project files for review. It is a total mess. I have to stay here and walk them through the paperwork." He was lying again. He wasn't walking them through paperwork. He was trying to hide it. "Is that serious?" I asked. "No!" he shouted, then lowered his voice immediately. "No, it is just annoying. It is just bean counters trying to justify their jobs. But listen, Kim, did any mail come for me at the house? Anything from the bank? Or specifically from a vendor called Crossflow?" My heart skipped a beat. He was terrified that a paper trail had led to his official address. "No, Evan," I said calmly. "Just bills. Why?" "Nothing," he said. "Just, if anything comes, don't open it. Just let me know. I have to go." He hung up without saying goodbye. I immediately texted Marcus, He is panicking. He asked about mail from Crossflow. Marcus replied. Good. He is realizing that the digital world is leaking into the physical one. The auditors have already flagged the steel contract. They are asking for the fabrication logs. Obviously, there are no logs because there is no steel. Over the next 48 hours, I watched Evan disintegrate from a distance. He didn't come home. He stayed in the apartment with Lydia, but according to the surveillance logs, it was no longer a honeymoon suite. The cameras in the hallway caught them arguing in the corridor. Lydia looked stressed, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, clutching a stack of files. Evan looked haggard. The tan from Cabo was fading into a sickly gray pallor. They were realizing that the $2.3 million they had moved offshore was not the safety net they thought it was. It was a flare gun signaling their location to every regulator in the state. On Wednesday, I went to the bank. I did not go to our joint bank. I went to the private institution where Marcus had helped me set up a secure trust. I sat in a quiet office and signed the final papers to segregate my personal assets. I moved the inheritance from my grandmother, money Evan had always eyed for investments, into a shielded account. I updated the beneficiaries on my life insurance. I removed Evan's name from everything that didn't require his signature to alter. I was scrubbing him out of my future. When I walked out of the bank, the sun was shining, but the air was cold. I felt lighter. The fear that had gripped me for months, the fear of being left, of being not enough, of being a victim, was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Thursday evening, Evan called again. He sounded drunk. Kim? He slurred slightly. Evan, are you okay? They are asking so many questions. Kim, he said, why do they ask so many questions? I built this project. I made them millions. And now they are looking at me like I am a thief. I held the phone tight. Did you do something wrong, Evan? I asked softly. The silence on the other end was heavy. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the background noise of the city. Sirens. Traffic. He was probably standing on the balcony of the penthouse he paid for with stolen money, looking down at the world he thought he owned. No, he whispered. I didn't do anything. I just took what I was owed. It was the confession of a narcissist. He didn't deny the theft. He just reframed it as entitlement. Go to sleep, Evan, I said. It will all be over soon. I hung up. It will all be over soon. It wasn't a comfort. It was a promise. Friday morning arrived, the 90th day. I woke up at 6 a.m. I showered and dressed in a suit. A real suit. Navy blue, sharp and intimidating. I did my hair. I put on makeup. I wasn't dressing for a day of editing at home. I was dressing for court. I walked downstairs. The house was pristine. I had already packed a small bag for myself. I wasn't planning on staying here tonight. Once the bomb went off, this house would be a crime scene, or at the very least, a battleground of assets. My phone chimed. It was the final message from Marcus. The audit report is finalized. The CEO of Stonebridge has been notified of grave irregularities involving criminal fraud. They are calling the FBI at noon. We file at 11. I looked at the clock. It was 8 a.m. I walked to the dining room table where I had sat with Marcus 3 months ago. I looked at the spot where he had placed the briefcase with $100 million. I picked up the divorce papers. They were fully executed, signed, and notarized. The only thing missing was the date stamp from the court clerk. I called a courier service. Then I called Mr. Henderson. It is time, I said. File the papers. Mr. Henderson said, Marcus has the forensic package ready to drop on the district attorney's desk the moment your filing hits the docket. We are coordinating the strike. I hung up. I stood in the center of the living room. I looked at the wedding photo on the mantel. We looked so young, so hopeful. I remembered the girl in that photo. She believed in forever. She believed that love was enough. I took the photo down. I didn't smash it. That would be dramatic. And I was done with drama. I simply opened the back of the frame, took the photo out, and fed it into the shredder I kept by my desk. The machine whirred, slicing the faces of Kimberly and Evan Turner into thin, confetti-like strips. I was ready. I walked out the front door and locked it for the last time. I got into my car. The engine roared to life. I wasn't driving to the grocery store. I wasn't driving to the post office. I was driving to the courthouse to detonate the life of Evan Turner. The countdown was over. 0 hour had arrived. I drove past the courthouse, but I did not stop there. My destination was the flagship office of Harrison and Cole Legal, located in the steel and glass spire that dominated the city skyline. This was not a meeting for a public hallway. This was the war room. When I entered the conference room on the 42nd floor, the atmosphere was electric. It smelled of espresso and printer toner. The long mahogany table was covered in files, laptops, and tablets. Mr. Henderson was there, flanked by 2 junior associates who looked terrified, and at the head of the table sat Marcus Hale. He looked different today. For the last 3 months, he had been the cool, detached architect of our revenge. Today, he looked like a general on the morning of a decisive battle. He was wearing a black suit, severe and sharp. When I walked in, he stood up. "We are ready," he said. I sat down. In front of me lay 2 distinct stacks of paper. The stack on the left was thick, bound with a heavy clip. It was my divorce petition. Kimberly Garza versus Evan Turner. The stack on the right was identical in thickness, but bore a different title. Marcus Hale versus Lydia Cross. They were mirrored documents, 2 marriages ending, 2 lives imploding, 2 weapons loaded and aimed at the same target. Mr. Henderson slid a pen toward me. "Everything is in order. Kimberly," he said, "the petition cites adultery, abandonment, and crucially, the dissipation of marital assets for illicit purposes. But before you sign, Marcus needs to explain the final component of the financial structure." I looked at Marcus. I thought I understood the money. I thought the $100 million was simply a bribe for my patience, a fee for my silence. I was wrong. Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Kimberly," he began, his voice low and precise, "you asked me once why I was willing to pay $100 million for a 90-day delay. You thought it was just to let them incriminate themselves. That was part of it. But the real reason is legal standing." He tapped the file in front of me. "If you had divorced Evan 3 months ago, the asset division would have been based on what he had then. He would have been free to open new accounts. Separate from you, when he started embezzling with Lydia, that money would have been his separate property, or at least, harder for you to touch." He paused to let that sink in. "But because you stayed married, and because you allowed him to use marital funds to facilitate his crime, the rent check for the Avery, the cash for the furniture, you have created a legal bridge. The stolen money, the $2.3 million currently sitting in the Cayman account, was generated during the marriage, by law. Until a judge says otherwise, that is a marital asset." I stared at him, understanding dawning on me. "You want me to claim the stolen money?" I asked. "No," Marcus said. "I want you to freeze it." He opened a folder on his tablet and spun it around to face me. "In the state where we reside, a divorce filing triggers an automatic financial restraining order. It freezes all assets, joint and individual, to prevent either spouse from hiding money, because you are still his wife, and because we have proof he is moving family money offshore. Your divorce filing gives us the power to lock down every single account Evan Turner touches." He smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "And because Lydia has commingled her funds with his in that shell company, your restraining order will freeze her assets too. You are the key. Kimberly, you are the only person who can lock the doors to the bank before they can run. That is why you are worth $100 million. You are the containment wall." It was brilliant. It was terrifyingly calculating. Marcus had used my marriage as a net to catch his wife. I picked up the pen. The weight of it felt good in my hand. "So when I file this," I said, looking at the document, "it stops them from accessing the offshore account?" "It freezes it instantly." Mr. Henderson confirmed. "The banks will receive the court order within minutes. They will lock the accounts. Evan and Lydia will try to pay for a celebratory dinner tonight, and their cards will decline. They will try to move the money to a secondary shelter, and the screen will say, "Access denied." There was one last thing. Marcus nodded to one of the junior associates, who tapped a key on a laptop connected to the room's large monitor. "We have the final piece," Marcus said. "This came in 10 minutes ago from the listening device we planted in the smoke detector at the Avery." The screen remained black, but the audio was crystal clear. It was Evan's voice. He sounded manic, high on adrenaline. "Just got the confirmation code. Lydia, the wire landed. 2.3 million. We are rich. We are actually rich." Then Lydia's voice, smooth and smoky. "Don't spend it yet, baby. We need to move it to the Shell Corporation in Panama first. Did you talk to the broker?" "Yeah," Evan replied. "He is setting it up. We move it on Monday. Once it hits Panama, Stonebridge can audit whatever they want. They will never find it. And even if they do, we will be gone." "I love you," Lydia said. "I love the life we are going to have," Evan said. The audio cut off. The room was silent. That recording was not just evidence of adultery. It was a confession to conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering. It was the nail in the coffin, the dirt on the grave, and the tombstone all at once. "He thinks he has until Monday," I said softly. "He doesn't have until noon," Marcus replied. I looked down at the signature line on the petition. Petitioner, Kimberly Garza. I didn't feel sad. I searched inside myself for a trace of the woman who had cried when she found a receipt for 2 coffees. She was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that in a world of wolves, you do not survive by being a sheep. You survive by becoming the hunter. I signed my name. The ink flowed dark and permanent. I pushed the papers toward Mr. Henderson. Marcus signed his papers a second later. The sound of his pen scratching against the paper was the only noise in the room. "We have a courier standing by at the courthouse to file the physical copies." "Mr. Henderson said, checking his watch. "It is 10:45. We will file electronically in exactly 15 minutes. That ensures the timestamps are identical." 15 minutes. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city looked small from up here. Somewhere down there, in a luxury apartment that smelled of new leather and stolen money, Evan and Lydia were probably popping a cork. They were toasting to their brilliance. They were laughing at the stupid husband and the boring wife they had left behind. I took out my phone. I had drafted a text message to Evan. It wasn't angry. It wasn't a rant. It was a simple notification, a courtesy copy of the destruction that was heading his way. "I hope the apartment is worth it." That was all it said. I didn't send it yet. I held my thumb over the screen. Marcus walked up beside me. He didn't look at me. He looked out at the horizon. "Are you ready?" he asked. I thought about the last 8 years. I thought about the wasted time. I thought about the $100 million sitting in a trust that would activate the moment the court clerk stamped my papers. That money wasn't a payout. It was a war chest. It was the capital I would use to build a life where no one could ever make me feel small again. "I am not just ready. Marcus," I said, "I am overdue." "Mr. Henderson cleared his throat from the table. 10:59, he announced. "The portal is open." I turned back to the room. The junior associate had his finger hovering over the enter key on the laptop. "Do it," Marcus commanded. I watched the screen. A loading bar appeared. It spun for an agonizing second, a small digital circle deciding the fate of 4 human beings. Then, a green checkmark appeared. Filing accepted, case number assigned. Simultaneously, Marcus's phone buzzed. Filing accepted. It was done. The legal restraining orders were now active. The banks were being notified. The trap had snapped shut. I looked at my phone. I pressed send on the text to Evan. Then I turned off my phone. I didn't want to hear the ring. I didn't want to hear the panic. I wanted to enjoy the silence. The countdown was over. The explosion had just begun. The collapse of Evan Turner's life began with a declined credit card transaction at 12:15 in the afternoon. Marcus and I were not there to see it, but we heard the recording later. Evan had ordered a vintage bottle of Dom Perignon from a local wine merchant to be delivered to the penthouse. When the merchant ran the card, the one linked to the account that held the stolen $2.3 million, the terminal flashed a code that no wealthy man ever wants to see. Refer to issuer. Contact law enforcement. At 12:30, the doorbell rang at the Avery. Evan opened the door, expecting champagne. Instead, he found 2 uniformed process servers and a team from the district attorney's office, flanked by Stonebridge corporate security, and standing quietly behind them, wearing the navy blue suit I had put on that morning, was me. I watched the color drain from his face. It was a physical transformation, like watching a candle be snuffed out. He looked at the badge of the lead officer, then at the process server who thrust a thick stack of papers into his chest, and finally, he looked at me. "Kim," he whispered. His voice was trembling. "What are you doing here?" I stepped forward. I did not yell. I did not cry. I reached into my bag and pulled out the file, the black moleskin notebook and the printed dossier of every lie he had told for the last 90 days. "I am here to ensure the preservation of marital assets. Evan," I said. My voice was steady, professional. "Since you decided to commingle your fraud with our marriage, everything in this apartment is now evidence." Lydia appeared in the hallway behind him. She was wearing a silk robe, looking confused. When she saw the police, she froze. Then she saw Marcus, who had stepped out of the elevator behind me. "Marcus?" she gasped. "Hello?" "Lydia," Marcus said. He sounded bored. "You have been served. The divorce petition is in the stack. Also, the eviction notice. The lease on this apartment was paid for with stolen funds, so the landlord has authorized immediate lockout. You have 20 minutes to pack your personal effects. Anything purchased with the Crossflow account stays." The chaos that followed was the sweetest symphony I have ever heard. Evan tried to run back into the bedroom, presumably to delete files from his laptop, but the Stonebridge security team blocked him. They confiscated his phone. They confiscated the computer. "Kim, please," Evan shouted, turning to me as the officers began to read him his rights regarding the financial restraining order. "You don't understand. She made me do it. It was her idea. I just wanted to secure our future." I watched him point a shaking finger at Lydia, the woman he had kissed at the airport, the woman he had claimed to love on the wiretap. The moment the pressure hit, he threw her under the bus without a second of hesitation. "You coward!" Lydia screamed at him, her face twisting into a mask of hatred. "You told me you authorized the transfers. You said you were the project lead." They turned on each other like starving rats in a cage. They screamed accusations, revealing more crimes in 3 minutes than the investigators had found in 3 months. They were confessing to everything in a desperate attempt to look like the victim. I stood in the center of the living room, watching them. I felt a profound sense of detachment. I wasn't looking at my husband. I was looking at a stranger who had lost his utility. I walked up to Evan. He stopped screaming and looked at me, his eyes wet with tears of self-pity. "Kim, baby," he pleaded, "we can fix this. I did this for us. The money, it was for us." I looked him in the eye. "There is no us, Evan," I said. "There is just you, and the consequences of your own mediocrity." I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. I took the elevator down to the lobby where the air was clean and didn't smell of desperation. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal victories. Stonebridge Development fired Evan for cause the same afternoon. Because of the overwhelming evidence Marcus and I provided, the wiretaps, the bank logs, the fake vendor contracts, the company decided not to pursue criminal charges immediately in exchange for full cooperation in recovering the funds. They wanted their money back more than they wanted him in jail. That was where the trap truly closed. To pay back the $2.3 million and avoid federal prison, Evan had to liquidate everything, but he couldn't liquidate the stolen money because Marcus's lawyers had locked it in the Cayman account, entangled in international litigation. The settlement conference took place in Mr. Henderson's office. Evan sat across from me. He looked 10 years older. He was wearing a cheap suit because his custom ones were locked in the penthouse he could no longer enter. The terms were brutal. To satisfy the debt to Stonebridge and settle the divorce without a trial that would publicly humiliate him. Evan agreed to give me everything. I got the house. I got his 401k. I got the entirety of our savings. I got the car. He got his freedom from jail, and he got the debt. Lydia fared even worse. Marcus enforced the prenuptial agreement with ruthless efficiency. Because she was proven to have committed a felony involving moral turpitude, she walked away with zero alimony. Marcus also sued her for the misuse of his reputation to secure business contracts, effectively bankrupting her. She lost her career, her money, and her social standing. She moved back to her parents' house in Ohio, her name permanently flagged in the industry as a liability. On the day the divorce was finalized, I met Marcus one last time at the St. Regis. He looked as calm as ever. He slid a final document across the table. "It is done," he said. "They are ruined. Evan is living in a rented room, working as a junior estimator for a landscaping company. He will never manage a project again." I nodded. It felt finished. The rage was gone, replaced by peace. "And now," Marcus said, "there is the matter of your payment." He tapped the document. "As we discussed, the $100 million has been released from escrow, but I took the liberty of structuring it according to the plan we discussed." I opened the folder. It wasn't a check. It was a certificate of incorporation. Garza Capital Partners. "You are not just a wealthy divorcee, Kimberly," Marcus explained. "You are now the principal owner of a private equity fund specialized in distressed assets. I have appointed a board of advisors to guide you, but the control is yours. The money isn't for spending on shoes, it is for building. You said you were a good editor?" "Yes," I said. "Well," Marcus smiled, "now you have the capital to edit the world. You can buy publishing houses. You can fund the stories you want to tell. You are independent. Kimberly, truly independent." I looked at the document. $100 million. It was a staggering amount of power. I realized then that Marcus hadn't just paid me to hurt Evan. He had invested in the person I had become during the process. He saw the steel in my spine before I did. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "Don't thank me," he said, standing up. "We made a deal. You delivered." He shook my hand, and for the first time, it felt like a meeting of equals. I walked out of the hotel and onto the busy street. The sun was shining. I hailed a taxi. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked. I thought about going home to the empty house, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It was just a house. I would sell it next week. I didn't need the memories. "Take me to the courthouse," I said. "I want to pick up a copy of the decree myself." I walked up the steps of the courthouse 20 minutes later. I held the paper in my hand, the official judgment that declared Kimberly Garza a single woman. I looked at the city skyline. I saw the Stonebridge crane in the distance, idle and silent. I saw the world moving on. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a scorned wife. I wasn't even a survivor. I was the CEO of my own life. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, crisp air of freedom. I put the paper in my purse, right next to the black moleskin notebook that had started it all. Then, I turned and walked down the steps, my heels clicking a rhythm of victory against the pavement, ready to write the first chapter of a story that belonged only to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and ultimate justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please leave a comment below telling me your country or city, and let me know what you would have done in Kimberly's shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, hit the like button, and smash that hype button to help this video reach more people who need to see that the truth always wins.